And at the time, when I got hired at OpenAI around the launch of GPT-3 to help sell the API, I was hired because I was the only person on earth that had ever sold a large language model before. What a machine can do, I argue, is not actually the most important question to answer now. It's what do we want a machine to do and what are we willing to let it do? Humans have an exceptional tolerance for human failure and we have none for mechanical failure. Speaking of which, it's really amazing right now that people are actively rooting against OpenAI simply to solve for the anti-AI movement. Standard of living rising constantly. The developed world has sort of never been less happy. And I argue this is simply because we stare at the horrors of the world all day on our tiny screens, disconnected from each other. And my point is that calling that an indictment of technology totally misses the point. It's an indictment of the screen. That's what it is. The battle is not humans versus AI. It's humans versus an addiction to the device and the screen itself. It's humanity versus digital reality. If we overcome that, then we can actually approach what I think I could consider sort of a modern panacea. Technology should be a story of discovering more of our known universe to reduce suffering and deflating the cost of goods and services. And most people do not hear that message.
This week, we have Zack Kass. Pleasure to have you here.
Great to be here. Thanks so much for including me.
You have a stellar CV. You've achieved a huge amount, and you were pivotal and instrumental at what we could consider one of the most important times of modern history. Give us a view why.
Well, that's flattering. I'll do my best to credential myself, and then we can, as you pointed out, get to the good stuff. I've spent I've only ever worked in AI, which makes the job right now particularly interesting. I tell people I started working in AI when no one cared about it, and I stayed long enough for everyone to care about it, which is, I think, how a lot of frontier sciences tend to work. So I'm talking to you from Santa Barbara, California, where I grew up, and went to Berkeley and studied history and computer science, and then went to work at a data labeling company called Crowdflower, which became Figure 8. It was Scale AI before Scale AI, or Mercor before these big companies built these massive businesses out of human labeled data. And I got to spend 6 years working for a guy named Lucas Bewald, who now works at CoreWeave and built weights and biases, learning about the importance of human labeled data at the time for statistical machine learning models, and then went to a company called Lilt, building large language models for the purposes of machine translation, and then got to know OpenAI. And at the time, when I got hired at OpenAI, around the launch of GPT-3 to help sell the API, I was hired because I was the only person on earth that had ever sold a large language model before. And it's amazing how fast time flies in this case, and how long ago 2021 felt. And then at OpenAI, I was a very, fairly early employee and got to build sales solutions and partnerships. And now I spend my time sort of in one of two capacities, either as a academic or in an academic context at the University of Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, or University of Virginia, where I teach and study the future of work and public policy, or an advisory context. And I spend a lot of time with Global 5,000 CEOs advising on AI strategy and policy. And now I have a book coming out on January 13th, and where I try to tell people how I think the world will look in 10, 20, 30 years.
From an academic standpoint, and it's fascinating that you worked on LLMs before LLMs were in the public psyche. What was it like seeing this thing explode, and from having, I suppose, the topic that you had been experienced and interested in go from obscurity into the biggest thing everyone was talking about?
Well, it took a lot longer than, it certainly didn't happen at that pace. There were sort of like three stages, that maybe more, but in the, for the magical rule of three, I'll sort of define it in three stages. The first is attention. The publishing of Attention Is All You Need, the paper by 8 Google researchers, we now call them the Transformer 8, who proposed that statistical machine learning models are in fact not efficient, and that transformer architecture, deep learning, neural nets is in fact the right strategy, and that we've just been doing it wrong. And this paper was written in 2017, and it catapulted things forward. And so you could sort of mark modern AI at that moment. It's the most cited paper in AI. And that's when we start to realize that actually we can build much bigger, much more efficient, much more powerful models. It's not clear yet that it's economically viable, but it's clear that we can build much better AI systems. That gives rise to GPT, GPT-2, and then, of course, GPT-3. So that brings a bunch of, no pun intended, attention to AI. And a lot of machine learning engineers start, people who had previously studied linguistics or applied mathematics were now actually rerouting into machine learning and starting to say, okay, well, what could we do here? That was really exciting, because we realized that, for all of AI, we started talking about AI in 1954. We started talking about thinking machines in 1900. And most of the journey of these things have been very theoretical. Like, we've been talking about what could be, but never really what was. And then that started to change. So I'd spent 7 years at this point in machine learning. And now I could be like, yeah, but we're getting really good at these larger models, and they're starting to do more general, interesting stuff. Most of it was text. Do you remember Wolfram Alpha, by the way, Graeme?
I do.
Like, Wolfram Alpha was so exciting because it was like, you could see what it might be, what might be possible, but it was still very clunky. That then brings us to ChatGPT. So then you have this period, let's say between 2017 and November 30th, 2022, wherein the models are getting good. They're not getting groundbreaking, but they're getting really good. GPT 1, 2, 3, GPT 3.5, which is my favorite of all of OpenAI's deployments. Maybe GPT 4, arguably, but the ChatGPT moment brought a bunch of really exciting attention to GPT 3.5, which for many people was good enough. They just didn't know it was good enough. But the major moment is GPT 4. That is the moment where we release a model that is astonishingly good at lots of things people have been saying wouldn't be good. And it's sort of crazy how quickly we blew through image models and how quickly we blew through text to speech and speech to text and even video models. Like, that's old hat. But watching these machines do really complex, not quite reasoning, but almost reasoning, for a lot of people was really breathtaking. And that put us on this new parabolic curve. That was amazing. That was, that was really impressive to observe. And one of the things that I always remember about those moments is that the science itself is not actually the most important part. The most important part is people's comprehension of it, which is why I'm sort of on this journey that I'm on now to help most people make sense of the moment and the place against the backdrop, because the science is going to progress at probably a pretty incredible pace. Our ability to make sense of it becomes way, way more important, it turns out. What a machine can do, I argue, is not actually the most important question to answer now. It's what do we want a machine to do, and what are we willing to let it do?
I mean, effectively, that's the rate limiting factor. Something that we've picked up from a lot of guests, and something I've seen personally across many different businesses, walks of life, is people's education. I mean, education is obviously fascinating in many respects, but also potentially a bit of a boring word when you're talking about how rock and roll the AI journey is. But really, if you ask the majority of people what AI is, they probably couldn't tell you. They can say some key words, but could they tell you how things work? Could they tell you what's really happening, whether it's vision language models, looking at all the different types and saying, well, what is actually happening? Where does the technology come in? What is actually happening, and how are things evolving? People almost have the distilled version from the press, and it's something we talked about on our pre-chat. People know the highlights, but they don't really understand the why. But when they can play with things and it seems real, equally, that the Dunning-Kruger effect of the feeling like they understand, they know how it works, but they don't really know how it works. And like many things, attention, not necessarily attention deficit disorder, but the attention span of how cool something is. How long is it for any human before you take it for granted? I mean, we talked about football.
Yeah.
Being a Newcastle fan, I'm used to decades of absolute rubbish. They have one good season and they don't do quite as well the next season, and you're like, they're rubbish. You're thinking, you were fighting for relegation, it was terrible, and now you raise the standards, and then now your expectations go up. How many
Yeah.
people are using ChatGPT, Anthropic, all the other systems going, well, it's not quite as good as it should be, good at what I want. It's almost the demands go up, and the curve of the value of what is quite spectacular declines quite rapidly.
The moving goalposts on AI is even among the elite is quite remarkable. I don't really want to name names for fear of bothering people, or I don't, who knows, but there is one pundit in particular, a computer scientist and critic, who has moved so many goalposts it's hard to keep up. But his popularity continues to grow because he's a critic, and people like critics. That we like rooting against people. Speaking of which, it's really amazing right now that people are actively rooting against OpenAI simply to solve for the anti-AI movement, even if it means rooting for Google. But we'll come back to that. Anyway, fascinating thing to consider how often the goalposts have moved. They went from AI is not good enough to AI is good, but it's too expensive, to AI is okay, it's now it's good and it's too cheap, now it's going to destroy the world, to we're investing too much in it, it has no economic value. And my point against all of the bubble and the just these general goalposts moving is that there are, I think, some principles that we are failing to recognize that are sort of consistent here. One, you pointed out, the Dunning-Kruger effect. People don't really understand how it works, but they're comfortable sort of thinking that they do. And the more they can touch and feel the thing, the better. Two, people are overestimating sort of the immediate impact and grossly underestimating the long-term impact. This is a common sort of misconception. But three, that societal thresholds, the question which we sort of frame in the book of how and why do we decide a machine is something that we want to adopt, has actually nothing to do with the technological threshold. And this has been true for quite some time, that there are like three things I point out in the book that really keep us from actually wanting to adopt a technology. The first is that we love control. This is particularly evident in autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles, by the way, poll at less than 35% approval globally. Right? Despite the fact that 1.3 million people die on the roadways every year, we're like, no, the solution to this thing is not tenable. We do not want autonomous vehicles. And one of the reasons is we want to control the machine, even if it means killing us. Second reason, and you pointed this out, is that the technological thresholds are moving too quickly. So people are not updating as fast as they used to be able to how good the technology is, because it's just getting better in literal real time. Right? Overnight, the machines are getting better and better and better. And I can go back, I have LinkedIn posts where people are sort of laughing at my predictions. And I go back now and they look conservative by any estimate. And those people, it's not their fault. They're not tracking the science. So how could they possibly know? I had a radiologist recently at a medical conference stand up after I was finished talking about the improvements in machines to do radiology pathology. This radiologist stood up and said, you shouldn't talk about radiology pathology this way. And he called me a tech bro. He said that the tech bros are lying to us constantly about what these machines can do. And he cited this survey where we discovered that, GPT-4 was not good enough in radiology pathology. And when he sat down, I said, I'm sorry, you're wrong. As of 3 months ago, GPT-4, this was at the time GPT 4.5, has now solved radiology pathology in every scan except the chest scan. And the fact that you don't know this is actually not a failure of yours. It's a testament to how fast this technology is moving. It's very hard for people to keep up. they don't actually know. But the third reason I argue, Graham, is the most important, which is that humans have an exceptional tolerance for human failure, and we have none for mechanical failure. And this I see everywhere. This is such a fascinating issue where people are so quick to be like, see, the machine couldn't do it. And it's dystopian to think that we will try to automate things with it. And it's literally why 1.3 million people die on the global roadways, 45,000 in the United States alone. And if a Waymo swerves into the wrong lane on autopilot, there's an international outcry to shut the whole thing down. And I stare at this thing over and over, realizing that some societal thresholds should never move. There's plenty of stuff that I argue is actually very important to preserve. I don't think we should ever marry robots, for example. I don't want that societal threshold to move. But there are many that won't move or will move very slowly because we don't risk adjust. We can't actually rationalize the change. We certainly can't rationalize it at the pace that we need to. And you compound that with the idea that the goalposts just keep moving. And it's really quite remarkable to stare at technology that can quite literally recreate videos. And people go, one, that's terrible, not acknowledging the implications of all the things it could create. And two, it's not even good enough. Look at the hands aren't good. And it's like, whoa, we updated really quickly to this, didn't we?
Well, it's two things which play into that. Last week I was in Geneva at a conference speaking on AI, and the people that were there, part of a large organization, it's fascinating to see in the real world, and I've seen this in the insurance industry as well, many industries, people are talking about adopting AI. First off, they have existing infrastructure. Now, if you're a company with 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 employees, and you want to change your email system, that could be a 6-month project, right? If you want to change your CRM system, and I've seen it with banks in the US that have merged, right? They're out of action for the entire tech team are out for 2 years.
Yep.
That's how long it actually takes in the real world to actually have digital transformation. And when we're talking about digital transformation with basic things taking that long, probably years, and the rate of change really being 7 to 10 years from traditional technology, when you have this new technology come in that is evolving quicker than a deal cycle, how is it possible for people, one, who don't do this for a living, to actually be up to speed with what's going on? And two, how do you commercialize when, imagine doing your sales pitch and then next week it's different, it's evolved, the week after it's evolved. Maybe your next follow-up meeting isn't for 4 weeks. And then, well, you know, we talked about last time, well, it's changed, it's much better. People can't keep up so much with that. So the natural instinct is probably to be relatively negative. And, you know, where do they get their information from? I mean, this kind of lends itself to another point, which we were talking about before, the attention economy and screens. And I mean, I found positively that people are learning really valuable information, probably from finding people like such as yourself, to get other opinions, to look for it. So humans are actively looking for insight and information so they can inform their everyday lives and their jobs and roles. But adversely, people are heavily influenced. So even with music, we found that, I think the last guest we had, Tim Gordon, so he was a chief exec of one of the big 3 political parties here. And out of all the people he knows, he said, everyone thinks they understand what the world is, what the news is. But you ask 50 people, they've got 50 different interpretations. They absorb 50 derivative types of information, each believing everyone else also sees the same information, but it's so curated, and that screen time, that addiction, that you're really talking about an alternate reality merging with the actual reality. And I think there's a crack where people are beginning to see you could probably trust the human side far more than the technology side, but they're conflating that technology is the problem when it's not. It's it's a different delivery system routing back from the internet and social media, which the uneducated tech people would, well, non-tech people may assume this is all the same thing. And again, if you look at social medias, they say, well, that's AI algorithms, but they're completely different use cases. It's almost
Yeah.
everything's getting poured into this big soup and everyone's assuming it's the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the same, right. I mean, we are, we wrote about this last week. I think so much of the current, well, first, I agree with everything you said. I think, I think the really interesting struggle with this moment is what I describe as the tragedy of unmetered knowledge. The tragedy of unmetered knowledge basically proposes that we know too much, that the that the really funny thing about this moment is that we finally have the technology to make sense of everything of all the information we've ever created, but we've spent the last 20 years actually sort of poisoning our minds with it. That with the internet, we were supposed to get the cure for cancer, and instead what we got was knowing way too much about our neighbors, or addiction to gambling or porn. And that's, by the way, that's reductive and a very pessimistic view of the internet. But on the, the comment of what Tim Biel sort of pointed out, that like this isn't what he probably envisioned when he built it. It's this realization that like we just simply probably know too much, and we can't. We're running in our brains a biological version probably of a GPT-1 or 2. And I assume that at some point we will graduate neurologically to a GPT-3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That may take time. And in the meantime, we've filled our heads with, you and I, with more information than all of our ancestors combined, right? I mean, you and I know more than all of our ancestors combined, probably. And I'm not sure that we're always better for it. Our conversations are probably more interesting than the ones they had. But are we taxed emotionally, spiritually? Yes. The basically records show this. Despite the standard of living rising constantly, the developed world has sort of never been less happy. And I argue this is simply because we stare at the horrors of the world all day on our tiny screens, disconnected from each other, and we are worse off spiritually because of it. And my point is that calling that an indictment of technology totally misses the point. It's an indictment of the screen. That's what it is. It's an indictment of knowing too much and not knowing how to make sense of it all. If you tell a 16-year-old, look at all the horrors of the world, look at Darfur, look what's happening here, keep scrolling. Now go play with your friends and have a nice day. A child is probably not supposed to or needs to know about that. This is my argument. A lot of people hate this argument, but I'm sure that we should protect the soul and spirit of the child by allowing them to graduate to levels of knowledge that we used to graduate to. And showing them everything that's breaking is an incredible way to sort of compromise and really tax their soul and spirit. Now, I think we are now finally arriving at a point where all the information, all the knowledge that we have is actually going to become useful, that we are near the precipice of incredible breakthroughs, and that the new sort of battle is not humans versus AI. It's humans versus an addiction to the device and the screen itself. It's humanity versus digital reality, and an interest in a physical reality versus an interest in a virtual one. If we overcome that, then we actually approach what I think I could consider sort of a modern panacea. Not everything will be solved, but we will actually be able to do very hard computational things and maintain our commitment to the physical world in which we live, which, by the way, probably determines most of our happiness anyways. Do you care about time with friends and family and physical community? Do you prioritize it? Do you have access to it? If you do, then you are probably happy. If you don't, then you are probably not. And not much else may matter, which is a remarkable reminder of what humans are probably here for. So I think that reducing this to technology versus is super reductive, and that we actually just need to have more discussion around the things that are really compromising us, which in this case, I think in modern, sort of modern technology is really the screen addiction. That to me is it.
Well, from a human perspective, like in business or in sport or any walk of life, a marriage, any relationship, the idea of why, what are you trying to achieve? What's the point and purpose? These fundamental questions, it's almost like everyone's been so distracted, like a Jedi mind trick. But I'm seeing evidence that the world, it's a weird conundrum. As AI gets so good, and I'm party to seeing experimental vision AI, all manner of things which are absolutely incredible. But obviously, having directed films and spent time in war zones and lived in refugee camps, following doctors and nurses in crazy areas. One thing I can guarantee, you go to these places and you end up with 100,000 more questions than answers.
Yeah.
So you begin to ask different questions, and from, as I say, going back to the life perspective, if you can no longer literally trust as a benchmark human experience and synthetic experience, then you see synthetic experience in the same way that you do with film special effects. And I would go back to Jurassic Park, right? Everyone was fascinated that these things, dinosaurs, were there, they were on screen. It was quite incredible. Now, that's kind of taken a said. So I want to be entertained. Oh, you got these special effects. Well, so what? Well, you should do. So it's almost drawing back to the point where things become so good that you're looking for the human elements. Is it a great performance? Is there a great script? Is it great direction? In a relationship, are you spending the right time together? Are you sharing experiences with the business? Is this of value to someone to the point where they're willing to part money? From the business perspective, and something I'm quite passionate about, how about we use AI for capabilities which were not there? I mean, even in corporate security, right? And because we've been developing things in and around all sorts, including weapons detection for public safety, it's possible to do things that were not possible before. Even if you had 1,000 people, which people are never given the budgets for, you could actually protect a vast amount more people. You could enable people with knowledge and experience, or with a passion, with commitment, to be 10 times better at what they're doing. So I don't think this idea of your jobs are going to be replaced, that narrative of AI is going to take your jobs, no. The AI that's going to work, really work and change the world, is the one that humans can interact with and leverage. And I think from a societal perspective, where you have that thing where what you really want is the human experience, the human connection, then you can differentiate. I think at the moment it's in that middle territory where it's a bit blurry. But what are we really in the modern psyche 2.5 years in?
Yeah.
I mean, as you said before we started the call, think about what old is like, and I mean, I'll let you carry on and describe that, the context of time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, you said a lot I want to respond to. To answer your question, people, what I've observed in sort of the writing this book is that humans have a real sort of very discernible lack of humility, sort of palatable lack of humility when we look backwards and forwards. And when we look backwards, we have a lack of humility. First of all, we have what's called rosy retrospection. This is this fascinating bias that it actually is the thing that causes, among other things, it causes nostalgia. And it allows us, it's an important psychological response because it allows us to store memories with more joy, which is really important. Otherwise, we might be really depressed, right? If you remember your life exactly as it played out, it would be very hard to wander the earth. Instead, we often remember sort of profound memories, but we can sort of attach to them a sense of nostalgia and romance. Even the hardest things that we've overcome, we can remember somewhat fondly. And this has good consequences psychologically for our brains and negative consequences societally, because what we do is we wander the earth and say, yeah, well, you know, 50, 30 years ago, it was really hard to learn anything, but that struggle was good for me, right? And we start assigning that rosy retrospection to lots of other things. And so we remember a past that was way worse than we actually remember, both individually and collectively. And then our negativity bias and our attention bias actually force us to do quite the opposite, which is bemoan a future. We assign all sorts of negative outcomes to a future that we haven't yet seen. And this is despite the fact that we sort of can observe that for a while now, the human experience has gotten better pretty consistently. And so we continue to talk about, oh, the 90s, those are the best days. Really? I can show you why they weren't, but this is just sort of like how we process. And this causes us, among other things, to sort of talk about any future of uncertainty, whether it's AI or not. If we didn't have AI, we'd be talking about, okay, well, we're just stagnated. Now we have AI, so we have a boogeyman. And I think that this becomes really important because even the smartest discussions are not immune to rosy retrospection and negativity bias and confirmation bias and selection bias. And they're not immune to the ways in which we actually assign sort of irrational, almost emotional charge to our conversations. And the job displacement issue, which you pointed out, is a really good one. But where this is particularly interesting is that we don't actually recall the past. We don't think about the past with any real emotional attachment. We're willing to be sort of more academic about it. And it's the lack of humility that people have when they consider that the Black Plague wasn't that long ago, right? When they consider that World War I and World War II were not very far gone. It's really incredible that then you're willing to talk to people and say, yeah, well, look how much things have progressed, but the future can't be that much better. They'll in one breath say, yeah, we've come a long way. And then in another say, but look how fucked we are. How are we, and they point to the political conundrum. And I'm like, yeah, it's bad. And also it's going to get better. and I'll tell you how I know this, right? If you study history, you learn that the world gets better all the time, for the most part. And if you study computer science, you learn why. Technology is a story of progress. And where the job displacement issue becomes so fascinating is that you and I, Graham, are descendants of people whose jobs were automated to our collective economic benefit, and we never talk about them or think about them. We are all better because we don't have to mill cotton by hand. We are all better because we don't have to slaughter every animal by hand. And yet, we romanticize when things felt small and local because there was some value to it. It just came at a cost of enormous impoverishment. And in order to solve food safety for most of the earth, we have to do things that are probably spiritually problematic, like slaughtering 80 billion chickens a year. And I talk about this because it's so important to bring nuance to these discussions, that the economic boon of automation is profound and is the thing that most people talk about wanting to solve. When you talk about wanting to solve things, you want to talk about wanting to feed everyone and educate everyone and house everyone. Those are economic issues. Those are not spiritual issues. Then what I realize is we have gone so far and done so well that people start to confuse these issues. And I am fascinated about the job displacement one for a lot of reasons, not least of which is the fact that when people ask me what jobs are going to automate first, because I do think jobs will automate, I think they'll change a lot. I'm always reminded that the jobs that automate are the ones that politically are allowed to automate. Like saying, oh, the technology can do this thing, so it's going to do it, neglects the fact that most work has political protection of some kind. There are incredible inefficiencies baked into the system because of lobbyists and because of political popularity. And the reason that people are somewhat right when they talk about the software engineers automating is not because Claude Code is so good. It is very good. It's because the software engineers don't have a lobbying group. It's because they're politically incredibly unpopular. Not a single American politician is going to die on Capitol Hill to protect the software engineers. They are not a politically popular group. There are a couple Congress people in San Francisco and Seattle, maybe New York. But I come back to the point that if we automate all the software engineers, as we have automated lots of jobs previously, something very profoundly good will happen economically, and it may not matter. My point now is that we are approaching a world where we will come to realize soon that we have in many ways solved economic problems, and that we now face spiritual and political ones. That for many people, what they want is no longer solved by more money, which was not something that our ancestors could say, not until very recently, at least in the developed world. And it presents, in my opinion, the point that you were making, which is that we are going to discover through technological progress that our next great battle, and I say this with as much humility as possible, is not economic, it's spiritual and emotional. It's how do we discover what it means to be human once we've solved the problems that our ancestors set out to solve? Once we automate as much as we can automate so that everyone can have access to the goods and services they need, then we are faced with even something more probably scary, which is, why are we here?
Well, there's an interesting vein which fits across a number of jobs which are probabilistically, and if you look at history, the most likely to go. People that are paid quite a lot of money to do something that doesn't directly make money, but is very expensive. So if we look at lawyers, does anyone really want to spend fortune on lawyers? Software developers, they get paid a significant amount of money. So, I mean, my dad was in advertising. He was like one of the madmen. So what happens when you become the big earner? Like in everything, in banks, any walk of life, the big earners are the ones you want to take out. They're the ones that ideally you want younger people to come through, but it's expensive and it's time consuming, and they're kind of semi-luxury commodities in a way. I mean, it's as soon as an industry becomes widespread enough and populist enough where it's oversaturated. I mean, there used to be a time when developers were expensive and then their value went up and then everyone wanted to become a developer. Well, what does that mean? That means software engineers and developers, there'll be way more. I mean, I think about this with AI. How many people are now getting masters and PhDs in AI? In 3 to 5 years' time, everyone's going to be one. We're going to have that wave coming through, so that's going to devalue. City traders, Wall Street traders, well, the trading floor was taken out because that's where the margin was. So when we're looking at the jobs that are going to be replaced, the majority of the world's jobs, carpenters, plumbers, electricians, school teachers, tradesmen, but also the people that make our food. You mentioned chickens, the people who serve the food. I mean, yeah, you can automate to a point, but equally on the other side, you can say, well, luxury goods, beautiful, handmade. I mean, do you know how long it takes to become a master jeweler? 25 years training. Yeah. There are so few around, and that means, you know, unless you're willing to put 25 years in, you'll never reach that point. But what they create, it's because it took them 25 years, right? The artistry, it's leaning towards what is beautiful, original, unique, and what is absolutely necessary. As you said, the people that are kicking up a fuss about AI taking your jobs are probably the people most in line as per history and can afford the lobbyist groups because, as you said, it's politically built in because it's so intrinsically linked. But if you unpulled the politics and you were very rational about it, it's probably going to be, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it. Just because something changes, and if we look at the evidence of history, everything is always subject to change. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean the world's going to end in any capacity. That just means it's different. But my granddad was a coal miner. No,
Mm.
people don't need to coal mine anymore. I mean, a lot of his family were asphyxiated and died with lung poisoning from going to work. We don't need to do that. Why would we? So,
Yeah.
what change do you see coming in the next 3, 5, and 10 years?
Well, the coal miner one is a super good example, and I studied a group similar to the coal miners that taught me a lot about this problem. The coal mining problem is fascinating for two reasons. The coal mining problem is fascinating because we probably should have stopped mining coal in the 70s. We discovered nuclear power in the 50s or 40s. We started building nuclear reactors in the 60s and 70s, and then we had Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, and it became politically unpopular, and so we shut it down. And in exchange, we burned trillions of tons of coal, and in doing so, physically harmed an entire population of workers, the men in the mines, and really wrecked the carbonization of this planet. And we did so on between an alignment, an unholy alignment of political parties, the left and the right. The left did it on the basis of all things, Greenpeace and environmentalism, the nuclear reactors, the two that became particularly famous as the bellwethers, made it very easy for the left to say we're going to harm the environment if we build more nuclear. And the right did it on the basis of protecting oil and gas, right? That's where they were taking money at the time, and oil and gas spent a lot of money and coal to shut down nuclear power. And we remember it as this other, we basically don't even talk about the fact that a bunch of our current ruling class and politicians organized to say no more nuclear power. And they don't, it's not convenient for them to tell the story. And so we don't really tell it very well. But I am constantly reminded that the cost of stagnation can be exceptional, and that what we wanted to do is get rid of the coal miner's job a long time ago, not because we don't want them to work, but because we actually want to save lives. And there's a job that I became fascinated with that faced a similar consequence that to me tells the story of job displacement, which again I don't think is an economic issue. In October last year, October 1st, the longshoremen went on strike. I don't know if you remember this, the dock workers in the United States.
Yeah.
And the head of the longshoremen union, Harold Taggett, went on CNN on the morning of October 2nd and very calmly pointed at the camera and said to the American people, "You have no idea how dangerous I am. I will destroy you. I will cripple you." He was talking, of course, about the American economy. And his demands, amazingly, were not more money and were not safer working conditions, which have been the two tenets of every labor union since we organized labor. Right? That's why we organize labor, to get safer working conditions and more money. His demand was simply that the ports guarantee the longshoremen that they will not automate their jobs. And the picket signs read, "Robots don't pay taxes and automation harms families." And I was so fascinated. I sent him a long and very thoughtful email. He sent me something very short and otherwise in response. He did not want to meet with me, but we met with a bunch of the longshoremen, and the results that we, of these conversations are in the book. And it's quite fascinating. And honestly, it sort of sheds so much light on this issue, the process of interviewing these guys. And I don't want to say too much, in part because it's there's a lot, but basically we asked them 4 questions that we asked them a lot of questions, but 4 told us everything we needed to know, in my opinion. The first: do you believe you could be gainfully employed outside the union? 90% of the people we spoke to or more said agree or strongly agree. Second question: do you want was anyone in your family previously in the union? 93% had family members connected in the union. Next question, do you want anyone in your family to join the union? 85% said yes, and 2 respondents said they were going to continue having children until they had a son so that their son could join the union. And the last question, what's the most important part of your job? Stack ranked, multiple choice question. The number 1 answer was community, ahead of cash compensation. And I realized sort of in the conversation with these guys, as I've realized in sort of other conversations, that it's simply not an economic issue. And we make job displacement about economics, but it's not. It is categorically not. That we are fast approaching a world where we have tied so much of our identity and our purpose to our work that even if there's more and better food on the table, we are facing an identity displacement crisis. A world where the 2 most common last names in the United States are Miller and Smith because we used to name ourselves after our professions. And then I realized something else, which is that all of us, and I pointed this out earlier to you, are descendants of people whose jobs were automated to our economic collective good, and that we basically wander the world together asking about everything we see. When is this thing going to be better, faster, or cheaper? Without realizing what we're asking is, when is a human going to be extricated from the manufacturing of it? And when you talk to the longshoremen, they want their taxes to be easier. They want the accountants to be automated. They want the politicians to be automated. And when you talk to anyone else, they want their shipping goods to arrive faster. They want Amazon Prime to be cheaper. And we're all sort of hoping that everyone else's jobs get automated, just not our own. And the history of job automation is so interesting because it basically moves the world forward economically. And in this case, it will be no exception. And the only difference, I argue this time, is that it will happen with so much effect that we really will be sort of faced with something, I think, more profound than the economic consequences, which are, what does it mean to be human? And my point, and you've said this, is that there's going to be this return to humanism. And we study it in this idea of automation boundary. In a future where you, Graeme, can automate everything, where would you stop? And by the way, the answer gets pretty crude pretty quickly. You have conversations over dinner. Where would you stop automating things? Everyone sort of agrees on a few things we should not automate. But it does beg the question, which is, how easy do you want your life to be? And for a lot of people, this is like a very aloof concept. Well, you don't understand how hard a lot of people have it. I totally agree. I'm proposing that eventually, if we can massively reduce the cost of housing, healthcare, and education, and discretionary income becomes, more abundant, then the real question is, where do you stop automating things? Where actually is the human experience most pointed? And you pointed out jewelry, luxury goods. There's a ton of experiences today that we actually want to be more human, not less, but we actually have to solve a bunch of economic problems to get to that place. And the way we solve those economic problems is by automating a ton of work. And it is on the path to sort of spiritual awakening and righteousness, I would argue, that we will actually discover that we have to automate most of the work that many people do today, not so that people don't work, but so that everyone can have access to the goods and services that we constantly clamor everyone should have access to, right? In order to give everyone the energy that, the abundant energy that we want, it actually means automating most of oil and gas and maybe totally getting rid of it because we have fusion reactors. This is a big, weird idea, this idea of collective benefit and individual pain. I'm not sure we're having the discussion at all, let alone the degree to which we need to be having it. But I do think that observing a point in the future where people go, whoa, what I really want is a really nice home-cooked meal because I no longer have to worry about dysentery and influenza and starvation. Now I actually can say, how do I want to spend my life? And what I want to do is spend it with friends and family. That is the return to humanism that you were describing. I don't know when it is, but I would argue it's within the next 50 years. And the path between 3, 5, 10 years is basically going to be this really interesting political battle where some jobs get protected and some jobs don't. And we call this the distribution problem. And what a lot of people have pointed at but can't really circle clearly is the problem that arises when you asymmetrically automate jobs, because some jobs are protected and some jobs aren't. What if we automate all the computer scientists but none of the longshoremen? Well, then all of a sudden they have jobs that the computer scientists don't, but the computer scientists don't yet have super cheap Amazon Prime. The distribution problem presents this sort of asymmetry. And honestly, I think that is going to be the weirdest part over the next 20 years. That some people feel like their lives are super convenient and others feel like their lives are super hard.
Well, I want to put to you a couple of points, ideas, theories, and it'd be good to get your response to them. So if we're looking from a very obvious dystopian view, so George Orwell's 1984, but not for the reason people typically think, right? I'm looking more at what is the ultimate reaction, because I see similarities with that and obviously the creation, the rise of the likes of Bob Marley, for example. Bob Marley and the Wailers is a creative response to oppression. You look at the majority of the great music, punk, was again an anti-establishment. So if we look at the theory of what really 1984 was about, this idea of the perpetual propaganda to put people into a state of almost psychotic insomnia, to believe they were at war with the enemy and the world being divided up, but none of it was actually real. If we draw parallels to a more obvious view that a handful of large companies, more so on the social side, as opposed to AI, but derived from the internet, have been influencing, and they're in the business of persuasion and influence, where actually it serves their business model to have people behave, believe, whatever it is in a particular way. It's not to say that there's naming names or blaming people, but the net result in the end is the complete, well, first off, an apathy towards systems, a compliance towards systems, then effectively like the band Rage Against the Machine. And that's where people are deciding, yes, you can fully appreciate AI can help, just like wheels on a suitcase, which still shocks me that it took God knows how many years before people realized you've got a suitcase and you've got wheels, or add the two together and now actually life's a lot simpler.
Well, it also took us a while to figure out we should put 4 wheels on a suitcase.
Yeah.
For a long time, it was just 2, which is also interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I was flying the other day and my thing with 2 wheels is falling all over the place. But in effect, you see the point. When people take it and take it and take it enough until they snap, the idea in world history, and going back to the Roman Empire and all the empires that have lived, in the end, people don't want to be controlled. And whilst we may experience that time of control, that snapback will happen and people will take control. But I think there'll be a more equalized capability of individuals to say, I choose this, but I choose to reject that. And you get the idea of personal choice. And in the end, you look for something, but again, as part of a community. I mean, in effect, that's what, a sports fan base, the camaraderie of people like you and in the team that you support, these communities you actively, I mean, again, punk, reggae, it's these communities created out of the opposite reaction to what is perceived to be psychological oppression.
I believe in, I don't disagree with anything you just said. And frankly, the experience with the dock workers suggests that community plays a bigger role in our jobs than we even realize. That like we're like, oh, I'm a Spurs fan, you're a Newcastle fan. That's our tribe. But actually, our tribe is, we have many tribes. And for many of us, for many people, work serves an incredible importance in a connection to a tribe. I do think that, um, the modern internet is, well, the internet is so new and the consequences of it have been very good and in some cases very bad. Social media, sort of principal among the bad examples. And I do think that it seems inevitable that people discover that the social media algorithms and the device time are not good for them. And when I remind everyone who talks about, oh, how, this is so bad, it's so dystopian. If you had studied the United States in 1955 or UK for that matter, you would have safely assumed that everyone was going to die of liver failure and lung cancer. And many people did, right? Many people did. And you and I both have friends whose mothers smoked and drank their entire pregnancy. It's taboo to even sort of talk about these things, but it was so rampant. And if you had stared at that moment, knowing what we know now, you would have safely thought, holy shit, this is so bad. And there was no attention being paid to it. It took many generations to correct, and then it did correct. Eventually, people were like, whoa, 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 this is not good. Now the correction seems to be too far. But what's really interesting about this moment, I argue, is that the kids are not happy. Alcoholism and nicotine addiction actually seem to produce some nostalgia or some joy among the population that had sort of fought these world wars, and people seem to be getting happier in the 50s and 60s. What's particularly interesting is this moment in time, the youth, particular Gen Z, seem very unhappy, and they're pretty quickly willing to say it's because of their device. And Gen Alpha is already responding. They're saying, actually, I don't want that. And it seems that we have reached peak social media, and in fact, in many ways, peak screen time. That is how humans respond. And to your point, I'm not sure, it's hard for me to make an assessment of whether we do or don't want to be controlled. But I think we definitely are good at sort of correcting to our happiness function. And we've been flirting with it for a while. But for a long time, standard of living correlated perfectly to happiness until we introduced the device. And then it broke. That correlation broke. And now I think we're going to rediscover that what we can do with economic abundance is spend more time with friends and family. And I really think the next awakening, and I talk about the Renaissance, is going to come around the dinner table first. You're going to see people go to the beach. I mean, I live in Santa Barbara. I'm at the beach. Tourists go to the beach, and I used to watch them take out their phones. And there is a noticeable difference in families when they go to the beach now. The devices are not as apparent. They're not as present. A lot of this is the work that Jonathan Haidt has been doing to ban devices in schools, which he's having a ton of success with, the author of The Anxious Generation. And a lot of this is not policy. It's just a recognition that we want to be connected. And that the device disconnected us and filled our brains with information that we couldn't process and told us to believe a certain thing that we didn't actually want to believe. And that AI doesn't have to be technology broadly defined as this enemy. It can be a system that helps us cure cancer. It can be a system that helps us discover an alternative protein so that we don't have to slaughter animals. It can be a thing that helps us provide precise scaled teaching. It doesn't have to be the display itself. It doesn't have to be the algorithms that trap us online. And this nuance is coming. It just hasn't arrived yet, in the national discourse. And so people still go, AI is bad because social media is bad. But that's not how it, I don't think that's how it's going to work.
It goes back to what I was mentioning before. All the experience that I've had from all the different podcast guests, it's as if we're all having a different conversation, which is different to the general public view. And it's fascinating that I've not met anyone yet that has talked to me about AI the way that it's talked about in the press. It's peculiar. People actually
Hmm.
running banks, running universities, sports stars, soldiers, you name it. Their interaction and experiences of fascination and of potential. Yet the majority will also completely agree with that idea that screen time has caused damage to probably a decade of generation.
Then I guess the question is like, and well, we can sort of leave on this, but like, why is that? What is happening here?
Okay, so I think that brings us to the last main point. So the business element. And I think there's, again, from my experience, and it would be, given especially what your role was, fascinating to hear productization of AI driven technology to solve problems. If you're selling what you've got because you've had such huge investment, and that's a blanket view of the major players, the same would go for any organization which has committed vast sums of money. Are they looking to sell what they've got, or is it about innovation? Because all I've seen for innovation is solving problems that matter, moves the needle, does fantastic stuff, and then it enables fascinating conversation, engagement. It's fascinating what is now possible that wasn't possible only a handful of years ago. And one particularly large company we were discussing before, if that's what they're selling, then they're going to continue to promote the narrative that fits for them, and that potentially creates a vacuum for probably the majority to actually get their voices through of how they are doing something that moves the needle, which is far more positive.
I have a very sort of maybe reductive view on this now, which is if you are not talking about AI as a means to increase access, then you have totally missed the point. I I think AI should be talked about in two contexts: novel scientific discoveries and increased access.
Hmm.
And if you are trying to promote AI and you are not talking about one of those two things, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know why it matters. It's the technology should be a story of discovering more of our known universe to reduce suffering and deflating the cost of goods and services. And most people do not hear that message, or they hear it in very esoteric ways. They hear, oh, we're going to cure cancer. And they go, oh, sure, when? Well, actually, what happened in May this year is we discovered our first custom gene therapy to cure a baby of a previously immutable disease. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the fact that baby KJ is going to go on and live a long and healthy life, despite the fact that it would have previously died by the age of 4. One shot. That's because of CRISPR and AI. When you put it to people in those simple terms, that we are solving exotic and rare diseases thanks to technology, they cannot tell you that you're wrong. Then they can wander down conspiracy theories that, oh, the pharmaceutical companies will never let us cure cancer, et cetera, et cetera. When you remind them that the average cost of most goods and services has massively deflated over the last 20 years or 50 years, that we enjoy discretionary income our parents and grandparents certainly could never have dreamed about, they're like, yeah, okay. But then you are forced to remind them, or then you're forced to reconcile the fact that housing, healthcare, and education in most of the developed world is becoming prohibitively expensive. And in my opinion, it's actually not that complicated. If you're not talking about AI or technology broadly as a means to reduce the cost of housing, healthcare, and education, or solve novel scientific problems, then you're missing the point. And if you start talking about deflation as the issue, which I think we should, then you arrive at the real issue, which is housing, healthcare, and education are not expensive anymore because we cannot solve them technologically. They're expensive because we choose not to. We have policied them this way. For 500 years, ruling class had the privilege, obligation, and opportunity to make their luxuries commodities for the next generation. This has been true for about 500 years. And our ruling class broke that promise. And they did so not just for housing, not just for healthcare, but for also education. Somehow, The current ruling party in the developed world said, no, all of this shall get more expensive, not less. And I say it this way as bluntly as possible because these things can be solved technologically. We just haven't let them. And I argue that AI is going to do two profound things. It's going to make everything that it can less expensive. This LCD screen that I am looking at you on costs next to nothing, whereas it used to cost $10,000. I mean, it's a very nice screen. Most of the gadgets in my room are basically free relative to what they would have previously cost, because we've allowed technology to deflate the cost of manufacturing these things. Why can someone drive across LA in an autonomous vehicle right now for $10, but a trip to the emergency room might literally bankrupt them 5 blocks? That is a policy failure, not a technology one. And I simply say, now is the opportunity to do two things: make everything as inexpensive as possible that we are allowed to, and then put exceptional, unrelenting pressure on policymakers to do to housing, healthcare, and education what technology has done to everything else. Let's stop pretending that these things can't be inexpensive. Let's actually build a world where technological progress, not socialism, can be seen as the answer to deflating the cost of goods and services by electing politicians who are willing to deregulate markets enough that we can actually make these things cheap. And again, this to me, if you talk about it in these terms, people go, oh yeah, okay, I get it. But everything else becomes esoteric because it's not the issues that they face at home.
Well, I think people do care about those. And if, again, that's why we do this podcast. If this narrative can be out there, people can appreciate, oh, that's the type of thought leadership we're looking for. That's relatable. That makes sense. Then really we want that conversation propagated out, because at the end of the day, most politicians will make any decision that gets them the vote. And again, it goes...
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Putting tremendous pressure on these people is the answer now.
Yeah. But I think it goes back to that, educating people, arming them with the ability to rationale, to reason, to make sense of it and make it relatable, and something I believe your book refers to, which is demystifying AI, and to the point that actually this is a human problem. AI is a human issue. It's not necessarily a technology issue.
Yep.
Thank you, Zach. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thanks for having me, Graham. I appreciate the time a bunch.